Good afternoon. This is Kathryn Harrison, founder and CEO of MAGPIE, and I am thrilled to be joined by Shawn Chaulk, famous as the Wayne Gretzky of Wayne Gretzky memorabilia collectors. I'm really excited to chat with him today about his passion for the hobby, hear stories about how he got into the space, how he interacts with other collectors, and get the inside scoop on a couple of the crown jewels in his collection. So first off, Shawn, thank you so much for making time to join me today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. Well, Shawn, I would love for you to start by telling us a little bit about your interest in the hobby. When did it start? How did you get into it? I know you have a very specific passion for hockey and Wayne Gretzky, but I also know that you collect a few other things. So I'd love just for you to start and tell us all about your passion for collecting.
Yeah, you bet. I've been a sports guy, a sports fan all my life. And so, my love for sports really has been unwavering since I was a kid. I've always had a passion for sports, specifically hockey, of course. I'm a Canadian, right?
But hey, I'm an American and I love hockey.
But with a love and respect for all sports. And the collecting part of my life has been really evolutionary. And I started, like a lot of people do, collecting autographs back in the very early 90s. I think it all started when I had just gotten into playing golf, and I subscribed to Golf Digest, and the monthly feature article was about Arnold Palmer, and it interviewed the people in his life, including his assistant. And she talked about how once a week she would open up all his fan mail, and lay it out, all his autograph requests, and then he would come in the following day and autograph everything, and she would look after sending it back. And I thought, that's kind of cool. I got to give this a try. So I clipped out the pictures from the magazine, and not having a clue where to send them, I sent them to the editor of the magazine and said, hey, could you forward these on to Mr. Palmer? And lo and behold, a couple of months later, I opened the mailbox, and there I had my first autographs in the mail. And then that grew a whole head of its own. I was addicted to autograph seeking through the mail, and I spent years writing athletes. I would drop off some Fridays 300 letters in the mail. It was ridiculous. And I amassed, it was crazy. But like anything I take on, it's all or none. So, that doesn't surprise me that it got that bad. But, I built up 50 or 60,000 autographs, and years passed before I discovered there was a game used memorabilia part of the hobby that, I didn't really know existed. And one day I was in a pawn shop in Edmonton. I had time to kill, and I was walking around. I don't frequently visit pawn shops, but that's where I was. And I was just stood up talking to the guy again because I had time to kill. And I asked him about the hockey sticks that were stood up behind the counter. And he said, well, those are NHL hockey player sticks. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like they played using those? Those are game sticks? And he goes, yeah. So I said, can I see one? And passes me over a Wayne Presley cup of coffee hockey player. And he said, that's Wayne Presley's stick. And I said, wow, that's neat. How much is this? And he says, $25. And I said, well, I'll take it. So there you go. Then the next chapter opened up, and I discovered this whole world of, game used memorabilia, and got educated and became part of that community. And then in 2005, and I always had a big passion for the Oilers. I moved to Alberta in 1980 when the team joined the league. So I was a big fan of the Oilers and Wayne Gretzky's. Yeah. In 2005, the Edmonton Oilers held this great big auction in conjunction with Classic Auctions in Montreal. And they were auctioning off a guy's collection who was a former staffer. And there was tons of Wayne's game used memorabilia in the mix. And I became a bidder and bought a few pieces. And at that moment, I decided I'm going to collect and focus on Wayne Gretzky game used memorabilia. And then that collection grew and that whole world evolved. And, that's how it always seems to happen. 3 years ago or a few years ago, I decided to put the brakes on the game worn memorabilia Gretzky world and transitioned into card collecting and card investing. And here I am today, a big card collector.
What advice would you have for someone that's interested or getting into collecting? You started in a very, interesting and auspicious way. How would you suggest that people think about collecting if it's something that they're interested in or keen to get started on?
Well, the one thing I wish I had is somebody to sit me down and tell me about all these different facets of collecting that existed. But that was before Facebook and the mass use of the internet and things for what we do today. So for me, it had to evolve. So there was a lot of learnings along the way of how I wasted my money. So the biggest piece of advice I think I would give somebody is do it because there's a passion for something or someone in the hobby. So whether that's cards or a specific athlete or a specific team, and create yourself a focus and then stick with that focus. Because if you don't, you'll find yourself spending tons of money and tons of resources and tons of effort and time just getting stuff just to build a big collection with no real theme. And it's much more fun when you have a focal point that you can, hone in on getting certain things to build that collection and create networks with people of the same interest groups. And it just kind of refines it a little bit. And I just wish I had maybe done that a little sooner.
How do you connect with other collectors today?
Well, like I said a few minutes ago, the internet is everything, right? Facebook groups seem to be the absolute biggest thing right now. Again, it's been an evolutionary thing. Before that, when websites became a big thing, the next step of that was user forums on websites. And then Facebook opened up a whole new world. And now we have these user groups and target areas in Facebook. And that seems to be the absolute 99.5% of the networking right now, I think, happens through Facebook groups.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then obviously there's, in-person card shows and things like that, which continue to exist, I would imagine. Obviously they've taken a little bit of a hit since COVID, but as you know, I was in Toronto a couple of weeks ago for the Sports Card Expo, and it was phenomenal to see all the people at all different ages, all different levels of sophistication in the hobby. I think that that's something that there's still some work to be done to move to the digital realm.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, those in-person get-togethers like the Toronto show, which happens every spring and every fall, and the big national in Chicago and the Vancouver shows, those are still very important in the hobby because, up until I started years and years ago, I used to go to the Toronto show and then I stopped because the show is more about cards and memorabilia type things than it is about game used. So because I was so focused, I stopped going. But I started going again a couple of years ago. And, leading up to getting to Toronto, most every person I dealt with in the card world was strictly electronic, Facebook, email, things like that. So getting to Toronto and putting faces to those names and shaking hands and going for dinner and having a beer really solidified the relationships that you placed great value on anyway. But now they become more personal because you've met that person, you can relate to that person differently. And I think that is really, really important to still have that interface happening in person at these shows.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And I think that level of trust that you can build once you really know who people are is really, really critical. Yeah. So I want to know a little bit more about you've talked about some of the kind of progression and evolution of your collection. Let's talk about Wayne Gretzky for a little bit, because I know that you have a very special collection, some very special other assets in the Wayne Gretzky world. And I know you've had some chance to interact with Wayne and his family over the years. So would love to kind of hear how beyond sort of the Edmonton Oilers event and auction, what have been those interactions? What has been some of the most kind of fun and interesting stories?
Well, yeah, I've been absolutely blessed in all the fun I've gotten to have because of this collection and all the interactions I got to have. I mean, we could do 6 episodes, I'm sure, just on some of the stories and the events we've done and been a part of. But I mean, some of the highlights had to have been, in 2010, I was invited by the Edmonton Kinsman Club to come down and set up my collection for a function they were doing where Wayne was the keynote speaker. And Wayne wanted to have a private tour of the collection first. So literally packed up 2 trucks and 2 trailers full of memorabilia and display cases. And off I went to Edmonton and spent an entire day with a team of people setting up the display. And it was pretty spectacular, if I do say so myself, at how it presented. But I got to privately walk through every single item in my collection, from point A to point Z, and talk about everything that was laid out. And that was absolutely thrilling. I mean, as a Gretzky collector at that point, I had reached the summit. I mean, my collection had grown way beyond what I ever expected to anyway. But to have it laid out and have Wayne want to see it was absolutely, I mean, I just didn't think it could or would get any better than it did at that moment. I had a photographer capture the entire event from start to finish. So I have it all captured in photos and things. And that was probably, up to that point, the most significant point in my collecting, life, for sure. That was so amazing. So I followed that up. I was there as a participant. It was phenomenal. And I thought to myself, well, this is great. The Edmonton Kinsmen put off a wonderful show, but I can do better. So, so I come back to my hometown and spent the next 2 years creating a Fort McMurray event, which would see Wayne be the keynote speaker. And I brought him up as a guest. I created a board and we put together a cause and set up an endowment fund for the local college athletics scholarships and things. And we created an amazing event that Wayne attended. He was here for 3 days with us. And again, I was one-upping what I thought I could never improve on. And I got to relive it all and spend even more personal, intimate type time with him because I was the creator of the event. So, I got to spend all the behind the scenes time with Wayne this time around.
That must be amazing. How does Wayne react? Like, were there any specific items that held particularly either fond or perhaps terrible memories for him?
Well, I mean, a lot of the things in the collection, he wasn't surprised that it was all out there because he's been very generous through his career and he gave all these things away to people over the course of his career. What blew him away was that one person was able to find it all and bring it all together.
Yeah.
That's the part that was hard for him to believe. But yeah, I mean, we'd come through and you see certain things and he would be like, wow, like, I can't believe this thing is still around. Like, I had his rookie helmet. Well, his rookie helmet, that's a wonderful piece to have. But through research and things like that, we also discovered that helmet was also his helmet he wore in the WHA and brought with him to the NHL.
Cool.
So it was a total match to both events. But the helmet was spray painted black. So what we discovered was he played his first All-Star game in his rookie season, and he had to have a black helmet. So the trainer spray painted the helmet black. So now it's his rookie helmet, it's his WHA helmet, and it's his first All-Star game helmet, all in one display case in one piece. So that becomes a whole conversation piece on its own.
Yeah, and there's such a need to capture those stories because the only people that probably knew that were the sports trainer and maybe Gretzky and maybe not, right?
Right. And then they probably thought it just disappeared because it did. I mean, once it was spray painted black, it came out of service and went in the storage room at the Oilers until somebody, got it somehow. But at the end of the day, I ended up with it. So,
that's amazing.
Tons of those things. And again, there's so many other stories. I mean, I went to Phoenix in 2003, I think it was, and I spent a week playing hockey with Wayne and a bunch of other NHLers at his fantasy camp. And that, I mean, that in itself is a whole new experience when you can, sit on the bench next to Wayne and you go out on the ice and he's center and you're left wing and you're like, what the hell, is this real? Like, you look over and you just give yourself, your head a shake in disbelief.
Yeah, no, you
You're
just pinch
seeing,
yourself, right?
yeah, your centerman is yelling, get to the net, and you look up and Gretzky is telling you to get to the net. I mean, that's a whole new eye opener when you get to live that. So many fun things, so many events, and so many, like I said, we could talk forever just on the events.
No, well, I think it's amazing that you have those stories. And I know that you're working on capturing some of those stories that are tied to your collection and your collecting days. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about some of the projects that you've got going on?
Yeah, well, for years I've kind of fantasized about, capturing all of those moments, because it's also always so much fun to share the stories about the events, and people always seem so interested in hearing how it went down. So each time I go to an event, I write the story after for my own, capture reasons and
Yeah.
whatnot, memories. And I just really want to put it all together and write a book on my life chasing Wayne, so to speak. And it'll be about all the experiences, about building the collection. And a portion of the book will be on the collectibles themselves. And it'll talk about, what collectors should look for in legitimate sticks and what to look for in fake sticks, and game jerseys and gloves and skates and all the other aspects of the gear and the collecting. Because I really think there's a need for it to exist in terms of capturing the memorabilia piece. Collectors would love to see that. And there's a lot of humor and fun and interest in the storytelling piece. But selfishly, the number one reason I want to capture all of that is for my own kids. I've always said if I publish 3 copies of the book, one for each of my kids, I will have done what I want to do. It's for my own purpose, really. I want to write the book and capture the stories.
So I was going to ask how does your family, what do they think about your collections? Are they avid collectors and sort of engaged in the hobby with you, or is it something that they kind of leave to you?
Well, to say they're supportive is an understatement. I mean, the support I get, God love my wife, no matter how many times the FedEx delivery guy shows up in the run of a week, she brings in the parcel for me if I'm not home. And, all the events I go to and the things I want to do and the crazy things and the crazy ideas, she just honestly gives me the space and the support to do them. And I'll never be able to express how grateful I am for that, because it's very important. We all have our passions and our vices, and having the people that are most important to you support them is integral in you being able to enjoy them. And I tell you what, I've thoroughly enjoyed every minute of my collecting and my hobbies. And I can't thank her enough for being a big part of that. And, I married her despite her being a Montreal Canadiens fan.
Oh man, wow.
That has afforded us an awful lot of fun, let me tell you.
Was there also a Canadiens memorabilia collection that's hiding somewhere in your house?
No, there's not. You know what though, because she's so passionate about Montreal and about more being not, a fan of my team more than anything. When she was in high school, she had a project to do in junior high, and they were to write a letter to someone famous and get a reply. So she wrote a letter to Chris Chelios in the Montreal Canadiens.
Yeah.
And he wrote her back and sent her a signed picture. So he's always been a fan favorite of hers. So I did actually go out and in one auction, I bought Chris Chelios's rookie jersey. And that's actually in a display case across the office. And that's her jersey. So
but sitting in your office.
He has a piece of the collection in my office, as each of my kids. So.
Oh, that's great. And what about your kids? Are they avid collectors as well?
No, my kids, despite my passion for hockey, my kids are all skiers and swimmers and dancers and all the other things that kids participate in. But, they're not big hockey people. My they support me, and they know I'm an Oilers fan. And my youngest guy, who's 9, puts on his New Jersey Devils fan as often as he can to rub it in, that he's not an Oilers fan. And
Love
my,
it.
my
As a
oldest boy
Jersey
is
girl, I particularly appreciate that.
right. So, they're not big hockey fans, but they know I am, and they know how important the hockey games are to me. And they sit with me on the couch and things. But, I just respect that they know that it's important to me, and they're on my team and they support it.
Oh, that's wonderful. I'd imagine there's lots of families where someone is a big collector and others are not. How do you I guess, what advice would you have for collectors like that? What do they need to do to make sure that your family can understand and appreciate what you have? I know you have a very specific system for if anything were to happen to you, but this seems to me like something that's really underappreciated and understood in the hobby, keeping track of what you have, where you got it, who the right contacts are. What do you do, and what advice would you have for collectors to make sure that their families, are prepared to take care of their collections in the event of something unfortunate?
Yeah, that's very important, and a very understated and I guess misunderstood part of the hobby that people don't take quite to heart, or importantly enough. You really need to have laid out what you have in your collections, because one of the reasons I downsized years ago was I looked around and I realized just how much I had tied up into it, and how disorganized at the time I was in terms of what I had and what its value was and where it came from. And I said, what if I get hit by a bus tomorrow? Where does that leave my family? Yes, they have all of this stuff that's worth tons of money and things, but how do they deal with that?
Right.
And it just became, I had this little eye opener that said, my gosh, I really got to have a handle on what I have in case that happens. Because to walk into a collection, that has thousands and thousands of line items, how would somebody not in the know of what it is know what to do or how to deal with that?
Right.
So, at the time, I used the tools I had, Excel and things, and I created spreadsheets and whatnot. But I mean, since meeting you, a big part of how I, came about to know you was through this platform that you've created called MAGPIE. And it truly is, I think, leading edge. I think it's where people with collections, no matter how big they are, need to look at, employing to inventory your collections and to leave that accessible, informative database of what it is you have in your collection. And that's key. The platform that you've created allows you to input, the values, what you paid, where you got it, where the LOAs are, photographs, things like that. But it also does market analysis and follows the current auction results for those items and draws it into the database, so that whether it's you using it for your own collectibles organization, or your spouse or family needing it in the event something happens, the data that it contains is so well organized and so up to date and so helpful that I think it would become key in the proper execution of what to do with what you have.
Thank you so much for that, Shawn. And I'm so glad that you found it helpful for your collection. And we are, really excited that you've got some of your assets and memorabilia in the platform, and we're excited to get your entire collection there. I think my family had a hurricane which ripped through our house, and so there was 9 feet of water in the first level of my parents' house, and we didn't know what was there, what was lost. And I think being able to keep track, particularly for collectors where there are stories, there's a lot of work, not to mention the fun and the financial tie-up that's there. Keeping track is so important. And I think it can also help spouses feel more empowered and family members to actually be able to deal with things and not have to try and, oh God, what do I do with this? In one of the Facebook groups we're in, I recently saw a woman who was trying to figure out what to do with part of her husband's collection after he passed on. And my heart just broke for her because there's so much that you have to do. There's so much loss. And then to have to add an additional set of admin tasks just seems kind of unfair. So
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also a great tool too, especially once you have your inventory in. If you're looking for or have insurance on your collection, to be able to give your insurance adjuster or your provider a link to your vault. I mean, it's fantastic because it's a live document. It's a live vault. So they have an immediate, up-to-date, picture of the value of your collection. So for insurability reasons, it becomes a really good tool.
No, absolutely. That's one of the big things, is trying to cover all of the nuances of being a collector, which can be incredibly fun, but also sometimes a little bit painful, and a little bit of a hassle. So you obviously have an incredible display behind you, which we can see. You've put on some incredible shows in the past. How do you share and show your collection today?
Well, actually, I really don't have a very well-established, publicly accessible means to show people. I mean, I'm on the Facebook groups. I have some really great Facebook groups in the Wayne Gretzky space, and some in the vintage card space that I participate in. So, we're always sharing photos and things in there. But now that, I'm using your vault, for example, I can send someone a link to the publicly displayed portions of my vault and allow them to look at it there too. So, that's a great means to do it. But, up to now, it's been, it's too spread out. It's too manual. I'd like to have, or certainly like to utilize one-stop shopping for that purpose and have a place where I can have photos of my items and things, but that's always a challenge. And I'm hoping that, as I populate my vault, I'll be able to share that with people when they ask, what's in your collection?
Absolutely. No, that's great. So tell us a little bit more about your collection and your kind of habits today. What's on your kind of list of must find, must seek? What are you buying and selling? Obviously, the hobby has evolved a tremendous amount since you started in the 90s. I'd love kind of your hot take on where things are at today, and what you're looking for, or what you're most excited about, either in the card space or anything that you're collecting.
Well, I mean, while I'm a hobbyist, I'm always a business person too. And at the end of the day, you have to be looking at your end game. Even when you're a collector, you really should be looking at your end game. Mm-hmm. So, for me, I'm watching the various markets and the various sports spaces every day. And I literally buy and sell anything that I can make some money on. I mean, that's the bottom line. I'm
Excellent.
a flipper.
Yeah.
So whether it's about the margin. So whether I'm flipping a $1 card or $100,000 card, like I flipped this morning, it's about the margin. At the end of the day, I'm looking to make, a certain amount of money, and that's what I strive to do. But the market is funny. You got to through COVID there, we saw some amazing spikes in all facets of collecting, all sports, all spaces. And then there was a little bit of leveling off, and now some of it's going back up again and some of it isn't. So, while I did really well on some of the spaces, some of the spaces I didn't do so well on, and there's some inventory sitting back there in a box that I'm sitting on that I may sit on for a while, but you don't win them all.
Right.
But it's an interesting market, and I'm flipping and investing more in cards, way more in cards than in memorabilia, and not for any other reason than right now that market is very strong, and so it just makes sense to focus where the money is, so to speak. It's the end of the day, it's a business.
Sure.
So the vintage market is really picking up steam. I found through COVID, the modern market, so 1980 to current, is what really spiked.
Sure. And why do you think that's the case?
Because of the age demographic, I think that was working from home during COVID. It was those late 30s, 40s, 50s demographic that seemed to have a lot more time on their hands during COVID and rediscovered their youth, which happened in the 80s, the early 90s, and were sitting on these card collections in a lot of cases that hadn't been dusted off in 20 or 30 years or more. So I think that was part of the reason why that area really spiked up a lot, just because more and more people came into the market out of having time due to what COVID did to people's schedules and things like that. So that one ramped really far up, and then it came down a little bit, came down a little bit more, and leveled off a bit. Again, little bits of it are popping back up. But the modern stuff went up here, and some of it has just stayed up here and continues to go up. When you talk about the Connor McDavid memorabilia cards,
Yep.
the Alexander Ovechkin and the Sidney Crosbys, some of their stuff has just gotten so unreachable for the average collector. It's insane. It's investor level buying. So it's an interesting market. It's and it's one you never know when to get in and out of. It's like playing the stocks. It's day trading to a large degree. And, you really gotta be watching things, I think.
And what are your thoughts on the vintage market?
The vintage market, I've noticed lately, has really starting to even pick up. It picked up through COVID, but now I'm finding that it's starting to pick up even more. The calls I'm getting to buy really high grade and high level stuff is quite surprising, to be honest with you. I had a card that I had sat on for a while, and it's I think my asking price on the card was $75,000 US, and it hadn't been moving. So I was looking at auction avenues and things like that. And then I think in a 3 or 4 day window, I had 3 serious inquiries for that card. And I had one guy table an offer that was above what I was asking for it, and I made the sale. But that's what I'm seeing in the vintage now, that people are just realizing that market isn't going down, and the supply for this stuff isn't going up.
Certainly not. No.
So if they want it in their collection, they better buy it. Right, because it's not going to get any cheaper moving forward on a lot of that stuff. And that's what I'm seeing now. People are really starting to see that this vintage stuff, the supply and demand formula, is not working in their favor.
Do you see a specific mindset in the vintage versus the modern, one being more of kind of an investor, speculator, kind of looking to make money on the overall market going up, and another being more of like a buy and hold? Or does it really vary simply depending on the collector?
I think it varies a bit, but a lot of the vintage collectors are collecting, in some cases, more cases than the modern stuff, are more affluent, and they're investor level collectors, and they want the best of the best. They know that they think maybe they're thinking more about the end game. I'm not sure. Maybe they have a tighter window on their end game, but they don't mind investing big money to get the key cards, because A, they want to have the best collections, but B, they know it's a solid investment. And a lot of these people, I found with COVID, when you look at the markets versus when I say the markets, I mean like the stock markets and things, versus say the hockey card memorabilia markets, I found more and more people were cashing out some of their stocks and bond type markets and investing in the more tangible assets, because they saw that, not only would they get the enjoyment of ownership of a card versus a stock, but they get to hold it, feel it, relive it, experience that rush of, oh my gosh, I remember watching this guy play. So they recognize that they can make just as much or more money holding tangible assets and being part of a community than just buying and investing in stocks and bonds and GICs and more secure things.
Yeah, I think it's also, there's just, as you said, the history and the fun and the passion for the items, the games, the players, the moment in time is like, is not to be underestimated. We've lived in such a digital world that having that kind of physical connection and tie is really appealing for a lot of people. So it makes a ton of sense. All right, we just have a couple more minutes for this segment, and there's been a lot of talk that we may go into, that we're in a little bit of a bubble at the moment, and we may go into a bear market. What do you think?
We may go into
A bear market, like where things aren't performing as well.
Right. Well, I think in the world I live in of the sports and the cards, I'm not certain that I think it's going to stay quite solid. Just watching, well, even if you look at the trending of the last 20 years of it, there's been some ups and downs that we can definitely pinpoint. But the growth that I've seen in the last couple of years, and where I'm seeing it, I think it's rolling along really well. And I think that no matter what happens out there in the real world, because I don't call my world the real one, I think that the one that I'm living in is going to stay quite strong. I think there's a newfound camaraderie here, and a newly built community, a newly built set of investors. And I think it's going to stay quite solid and quite strong. Again, especially when you're looking at these really, I say the vintage, but even the mid-range, that 50s to 80s type sports stuff that you're investing in, the supply isn't changing, but right, the demand and the desire to own it is. And when those things meet like that, the market doesn't go down. It just doesn't go down. So unless that outside world of employment and economy and inflation really hits this area hard, I don't think we're bulletproof, but I think we're in a pretty good flak jacket, and we're going to ride it out pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you bring up is really important, that community aspect, because you've really now had a whole new generation of people that have come into collecting as adults, and who see it both as investment and as entertainment and hobby and fun. And so I think you're gonna, I mean, I tend to see like there'll be booms, there'll be like slight kind of bust is maybe the wrong word, but drops. But at the end of the day, you have a much broader audience of people who are able to connect with one another, share and understand what assets are out there, how rare they may be, what kind of condition. And I think there's a lot of pieces that have come together to help really create a long-term, stable and sustainable future in collecting. It's a hobby that's existed since mankind existed, right? So right, it's kind of fun to see what the next iterations of it are. Awesome.
What I really like about this, the fact that we're digital, is that we're all equal. We're all behind a keyboard. We're all a username. And whether you want a $1 card or a $100,000 card, you're just a guy clicking on an email, reaching out to an audience, and somebody's going to come back saying, I got it, I can help you. It's like we're all on the same playing field. Yes, there's 5-cent collectors and $5 collectors, but at the end of the day, we're all just collectors. We're all sitting in front of our computers and our keyboards, all enjoying the same hobby, just in different avenues in different areas. And that's what makes it fun. We're all the same.
I think that ethos is huge and so important. And I think it's fun to see, what's the latest card that's gone to auction for $100K or $1 million. But I think that is kind of part of the entertainment, as much as it is that anyone can pull a rookie card out of a pack, and who knows, what will it be worth, and if you take good care of it and all those things. So yeah. Amazing. Well, thank you so much. This has been great. Is there anything that I haven't asked about that you want to talk about that I've forgotten?
There's enough stuff that you haven't asked about that we could do 10 more episodes. So I'll leave it for the next episode.
Good. Excellent. I love it. Okay, great. Well, that was fantastic. Thank you so much.